Dear Father in heaven, thank you for this opportunity to have a dialogue and some learning amongst one another. There's some specialists here, several of them. And I pray that your Holy Spirit will guide our conversation. We pray in Jesus' name. Amen. I'm not one of those specialists in this area. I'm learning. I learned this morning, and I appreciate that. And I was mentioning to a few here just a little bit ago, and I know this would be a common question, and I've got two mics up here, and I'm not going to be taking the main mic. But Dianne, if you could get one. Antionette, if you get the other, and then also there'll be some questions probably for Carol and Christy. Yeah. I'm sure one of the most common questions is, what if the mother's life is at stake? Then what? And I had that question in the lobby after the church service. And I had an answer, but I'd like to hear other people share what they would say. And my answer was, what would Jesus do? And then what did Jesus do? And when his life was at stake and another person's life was at stake, what did he do? He was willing to sacrifice his life. And if I was a mother, or if I was the father of the child that was growing in the uterus, I would like to suggest I would take that same attitude. In my wife's, yes, my wife is pointing to me. If it was growing in her, then her life was at stake. You know, I couldn't make the decision for her, but I would support her if she made that decision. So I'd like to hear anyone else have an answer. Now it is.
Okay. I love honest questions, because then you know you're not fooling around. Sometimes people ask questions because they want to trap you or trick you. But I worked in a neonatal unit for a while where we would get really early babies. Can you hear me? Hold it closer. And this was before I met Antionette. This was when I was still just struggling with myself. And I remember very well a woman coming in, and she had been diagnosed with cancer. She was pregnant. They had encouraged her to abort, but she waited until her baby could survive outside the womb before she started chemotherapy. And I will never forget that. That woman's faith just made such an impact on me. And it was long before I met Antionette and was involved in any kind of abortion issues. But she waited till her baby was old enough, and they took her baby, C-section, and the baby was in the unit, and then she started her chemotherapy. And I just was so blessed by her faithfulness. With that being said, this is a real biggie. When people want to claim the health of the mother to justify an abortion, there's actually very, very few where it really is the life of the mother is in imminent danger. And I don't know if you remember, but when I did my first seminar, I gave the definition of, our definition of abortion. It's an intentional act to terminate a pregnancy. And when you do have an imminent emergency, a woman is bleeding, a life is going to be lost. That doctor's intent is not to terminate a pregnancy. That doctor's intent is to save as many lives as he can. And it makes me really sad when people use this scenario as an excuse for abortion. And so
I think it's important to remember that when we've talked about earlier today, we're talking about intrinsic value of the human being. So intrinsic value applies to every human being. It's not a matter of elevating the unborn and devaluing the mother. Both are equally valuable. The question is, how are we going to respond in a crisis, truly a crisis situation? As Dianne alluded to, the number of situations where the mother's physical life is going to be lost, that's very, very low. We know because Alan Guttmacher Institute puts out statistics. The Alan Guttmacher Institute is the research wing of Planned Parenthood. Planned Parenthood is very much in favor of abortion. I think reasonable people could agree on that. And so Alan Guttmacher does research for Planned Parenthood. They put out their numbers. It's about 1% of abortions that are done to save the life of the mother, to save the physical life of the mother. There are 800 to 900,000 abortions that were done in the United States alone, I think in 2020. And so that's a huge number of abortions that are being done for reasons other than the physical life of the mother is going to be lost. Again, what did we talk about? Let's be intellectually honest about this conversation. You can choose to believe whatever you want. I can choose to believe whatever I want. But let's at least both be intellectually honest about what we're choosing. So in the scenario of like an ectopic pregnancy, you have, I think it's a zygote at that point, it's coming down the fallopian tube and it gets stuck, right? The fallopian tube is not the proper environment. The fallopian tube is not the proper location. It's supposed to be in the uterus, but it's gotten stuck in the fallopian tube. What's going to happen? Well, if the unborn is stuck there and kind of begins to grow, it's going to cause a hemorrhage. It's going to cause the mother to bleed out, essentially. So if a doctor goes in and removes the unborn from a place where it is not supposed to be, he's not seeking to take the life of the unborn. He's seeking to save the life of the mother. To my knowledge, you cannot take a zygote from the fallopian tube, insert it into the uterus, cause it to attach to the uterus, and then a regular pregnancy results. To my knowledge, that's not possible at this point.
yeah, the last research I found about that, because and it was either it was in one of the Norwegian. They have tried that and they have not been successful yet, where they've tried to recover.
So in that instance then, if you're not able to take the unborn out at that stage and put it into the uterus where it is supposed to be, where it's going to grow and flourish, then you save the life of the mom. You're in like a triage situation. The mother's life isn't worthless. She's made in the image of the Lord too. And so you're seeking to save who can be saved in that scenario.
In that scenario, the baby's not going to survive.
Right.
Even if you didn't do anything, the mother, they would bleed out, the mother would die, the baby would die. So either way, you've got that issue. Okay.
There was a hand?
Okay.
No?
So we're going to be creating opportunity for people to ask a question, but you were going to say something. You started to put the mic up. Okay. So any comment that you've had in your thoughts, because I'm sure that you've dealt with this question.
Yep. Yes. So also with the life of the mother, she spoke to the intent is not to terminate the pregnancy. That the intent is to save the mother. And I know that many in the pro-life movement believe that the baby, if the mother's life truly depends on it and the baby has to come out, there's no reason why the baby can't just be born. And if it's premature and can't survive, it can be given palliative care so it doesn't suffer. Abortion is taking the life of the baby before it's born. And there's really no need to do that to save the life of the mother, because the baby can just be born and then be allowed to pass away peacefully after birth. So.
And that's huge. I'm glad you brought that up, because the grief process versus the trauma of aborting a baby versus letting that baby be born and letting that parent grieve the loss of this child, going through the normal process of grief. We want to call grief normal, instead of the trauma and the self-hatred from aborting this baby is huge. I'm a big advocate of letting that mother have her baby and hold that baby.
And even, you know, at lunch today, someone brought up the idea of fetal deformities. And again, please don't hear condemnation. There's no condemnation here. There's no judgment here. We're simply asking for an honest conversation. We can disagree and still be friends, right? We can disagree and still sit next to each other at church or picnic or wherever. But let's be honest about what's happening. So if you have a case where there was, maybe the mother has cancer, maybe we were at a college several years ago, and one of the pastoral students approached us and said, what if it's this really bad scenario and the doctors are telling her you need to have this treatment or you need to get rid of it, and what am I going to tell her, because I don't know what's best for her to do. And I think the enemy, he sets up these scenarios where it must be mother versus child, but that's not the way the Lord works. And I'm talking about the Lord because I'm in a church. I'm talking to Bible people, okay? So the God of the Bible doesn't just work in A versus B. He's got 100 different ways to answer this particular problem. And as I sat talking to that student, I said, Lord, please give me wisdom. And we had this really fascinating conversation where, what if, instead of just saying, as many doctors do, and some pastors say, abort, when that wasn't the counsel he should have given, what if pastors were willing to fast and pray, get on their knees 10 days, 20 days, 30 days, like, I'm going to walk with you through this. We're going to find an answer together because I believe in your value, but I also believe in the value of your unborn child. And instead of simply saying, well, there's a danger lurking and we're automatically going to get rid of someone, we're automatically going to eliminate someone's life. That's not the way the Lord works. And oftentimes we can slow down. There are other ways to treat a thing. There are other ways to handle something so that the value of both lives is preserved and honored.
And one thing that you said, and what we had talked about, is time. Whenever there's an emergency and there tends to be panic, everything has to happen fast. And that's where we just slow down. And someone who is secure with their faith and their hope needs to be the one to talk to this woman and say, let's pray. Don't ever feel like you have to have all the answers. We won't always have to have the answers, but we can always pray together. Let's seek the Lord and ask the Lord for wisdom. Now, again, I want to tell you another story. The Lord was giving me this experience, and I didn't even know I would use it someday. When I worked in the unit, and we'd have these preemie babies, there was a Mennonite couple.
Mike, a little bit.
There was a Mennonite couple, and they had had a baby. They had been told to abort this baby, but that was not even an option for this couple. They had the baby. It was grossly deformed, and it wasn't going to live for very long. I was watching. I was an observer. They wrapped this baby up in the blankets and held this baby, took this baby home, and it probably died in 2 or 3 days. It had a lot of problems. But that just touched my heart because she loved her baby, and she held her baby, and she had comfort from her friends and family that were with her. But again, she was able to grieve the loss of this baby. Her dignity was preserved. I think when we look at this, preserving one's dignity, they lost their baby and they grieved their baby with dignity. They didn't have to go through the remorse of terminating a pregnancy and then wondering, what if? What if the Lord had healed my baby? What if my baby had been diagnosed wrong and was born normal, which happens? Yes.
Okay, just a second here. Let me use the mic.
Yeah, I have a good question for both of you. I think, like, as Christians, we should pray also that there should be doctors, since science has been so advanced and everything. Why, like, maybe, is there a way that doctors can find out how to prevent, for example, removing the fetus from the fallopian tube and there's got to be some kind of surgery to where that can be prevented. Like if they detect it early, so that the mother doesn't have to suffer and be at risk of her own life. You know, like if the science has been so advanced in 2022. I mean, this is 2022, and so many things have been discovered. Why can't they have some kind of preventive medicine to where the fetus can be put into the...
They haven't. My sister is actually an OBGYN in Florida, and I, tap into her periodically. And at this point, they have not successfully been able to remove the fetus from the fallopian tube and replant it.
In other words, science is advanced, but they're still limited.
There's still limitations.
Amen. Amen.
Okay? Yes, another question.
Speaking of deformed babies, rather than thinking they just have to be done away with because they don't look good enough for us, what was that man's name that we saw? No hands, no arms, no legs?
Nick.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
Think of that. He has done so much good. He's far from useless. So just because someone is deformed doesn't mean we have to get rid of them.
Have you ever seen the Butterfly Circus with him in it? Oh my, it's just a
film.
short video, and he's in there. But I love to see videos of him with children born with his same, the same limitations that he has. They light up. It's beautiful to watch him work with other, but the ones I've seen are children with that same, or similar disability.
Yeah, and I think we come back, when we're talking about fetal deformities, we come back to that standard. We always come back to the standard. No matter what the question is today, frankly, I'm going to point you back to the standard. There has to be something that we're jumping off from. There has to be something we're building off of. There must. Otherwise, we're going to say, you have blue eyes and you have brown, and I don't like people with brown eyes. I'm going to get rid of you. You're educated. I mean, we've had genocides where literally all of the educated people were wiped out. We've certainly had genocides where people of a certain color were wiped out. Or you go to a certain country, and if you're a female, they don't really value you. They value men. And so we see this happening across the entire globe. Are we really going to be intellectually honest? Are we going to allow that to keep us consistent when it comes to the value of the human being? Fetal deformities cannot be a reason that we can get rid of people. It just can't. Not if we're going to claim to believe the God of the Bible. We can do whatever we want, but if we're going to be consistent in terms of our ethic, in terms of the God we say we serve, then there are certain ways we must choose on these issues. Now, I will say, in the same way that the church that I grew up in, they were instrumental in helping my mother and I to survive. They came alongside us. They walked with us in hard places. And so they didn't simply say, no, you shouldn't have the abortion. They did hard things with us. They assisted. They were there. We do need to be a place where people can come in their difficulty. I know a good friend of Dianne's, I believe, has a son who is in a wheelchair, and there are just, there's help, there's assistance that's needed. Are we going to come alongside people and assist? Are we going to come alongside people and help? Because that's our job as the hands and feet of Christ. That's what we should be doing. But as my sister said, we've really gotten accustomed to this idea of perfection and what we believe is valuable and isn't, even though we claim to be believers. I don't know if it's been mentioned today, but I think in Iceland, you can't find any more children with Down syndrome because they got rid of all of them. That is shocking that they eliminated, terminated, took out of existence everyone with Down syndrome, so you can't even find them in the country. And it is celebrated, and as a purification of something. And so, is that who we're going to be? I mean, really? I can't answer that question for you, and you can't answer it for me, but we must decide. We must.
I love this because the conversation, if we're really honest with ourselves, this is what we really have to address. You know, it's easy to stand back and say, no, no, no. But if you're not willing to get into the trenches, and I say this all the time, do not open your mouth. Exactly. Do not open your mouth and tell somebody what they should or shouldn't do if you're not willing to get into the trenches with them. That.
And bouncing off of Diane's point, we've had a couple people, we exhibit at different conventions, and a couple people have come up and said, well, what resources do you have? What resources are you providing? What are you doing? And we've had to be honest and say, you know, getting this conversation started has been a very full-time thing. Because if people don't actually believe in the value of the unborn, if they don't actually believe that women deserve better than abortion, resources will never come. You look at slave trade. Quakers, other people, they had to talk and talk and talk and talk, and finally everyone decided, you're right, I think we're going to value people equally. And people's minds, hearts began to be transformed. Talking about this is important. That's why individually it's important what you believe, because it comes out in a life ethic. It comes out in your conversations. It comes out in your interactions. It's not a small thing. You guys, most of you probably have never heard of Andy Merritt, but he was extremely instrumental in my life, and he changed the course of my history. Someone may never hear your name or your name or your name. It doesn't matter. You, in and of yourself, can be extremely instrumental in changing another person's story. And that's the kind of ethic we have to have and show to the world.
Yeah, before you do the question, you've used the word, what's the standard? What's the standard? What's the standard? Define real simply the standard.
Well, I would point back to, you were made in the image of the Lord at creation. He died on you on the cross, so he has established your value. It's absolute from the very beginning, from the moment of conception.
So everyone is intrinsically valuable.
From the moment of conception.
Would a sense be the standard?
Yes.
Yeah.
From their very beginning.
To confirm on that. Okay?
It's not really a question, but I want to praise the Lord very much because, like you said that you could have been aborted. The same thing with me. So thanks for my mom that somebody told her and made the decision not to. So that's why I feel very, very, very. It's a very important topic for me. You know, praise the Lord for that.
Amen. Amen.
You know, on that note, I have such regard, and whenever it's appropriate, I always want to, when it's appropriate, someone who chooses to carry their pregnancy and then adopt that baby out is one of the bravest things I've ever seen a woman do. You know, she carried her baby and then let someone else, she gave her baby to someone else to rear. That's incredible. And we just need to be so sensitive about what we say in public, because you never know who is listening. And you can absolutely shut doors, even if you're talking about someone's whatever, just being critical of someone else's behavior or lifestyle or whatever. Someone over here, if they see your critical spirit, you've pretty much shut yourself off from them ever coming to you and asking for help. It's so important as Christians that we really do that self-examination and how we conduct ourselves. There was, got a story. I had a very dear friend, still love this guy to pieces, him and his wife. We were at their house once, and the subject of abortion came up, and he, just as a matter of fact, he said, women who've had abortions should be all lined up and shot. He did not know, obviously, that I had had two, but it was so cruel, and he wasn't thinking. And I would never, ever feel like I could go to him and say, I'm dying inside. I did something I regret. You know, it was just so, when you're in a point where you're in a crisis, for you to even consider abortion, it's a very black place. It's a very scary, dark place. It's not like one lady said, going to the ice cream shop and trying to decide what flavor of ice cream you want. It's a very bad place. And so when, another one that always hit me, when people would say, I can't believe she would do that to her baby. Now, she may honestly be thinking that, but to verbalize it and to be 2 chairs down and hear it and know I did that to my baby, it just, and the Satan uses it to confirm our unworthiness. I mean, that's how he wants us to believe. That's why I love that quote, how the Lord never loses a case. You know, Satan's on our right hand, our right shoulder, tempting us to think, you know, we're not worthy. But Jesus is in the courts of heaven, you know, rooting for us.
Amen.
So you're emphasizing the compassion that we have for people, even in general conversation.
Oh, absolutely. And with as the awareness of our own value, you know, becomes more and more solid in our thinking, it is going to affect how we talk about other people, how we treat people, you know.
I might have missed this since I came late, so I apologize if it's a repeat question. But we were having this conversation over lunch. And what about the situations, like how do you conversate about somebody who's been raped and they're like, I decided to have an abortion. Maybe it's from their father, you know, so you have incest or you have something, you know, very gross things where, okay, the mother's life isn't at risk. She's not the 1%, but, you know, and then I have a follow-up to that. And I'm not advocating abortion, but to really explore it, you know, with another person, because when you're actually having a conversation with somebody that's there, it's just like you look at the prenatal effects, you know, you look at the family that they're going to be raised in. We talk about adoption, and it is a beautiful thing a lot of times, but how many kids are abused in adoptive homes, you know, foster homes, and they're, you know, so like, what are you really setting yourself up for, or a child up for? Like, wouldn't it almost be merciful to that child to say, I love you enough to let you not have to experience hell, potentially. But maybe that's hypothetical, and you can't go off a hypothetical situation.
I love your honesty, because I'll be honest with you guys, when I first met up with Antionette and it looked like the Lord was putting us together, I had to go there. And each one of us has to go there and come up with our own conviction, you know. And, well, did you want to say a little bit more before I go off?
You can if you want.
Okay.
I'll just jump in after.
So I started doing research. I wasn't at the point yet where there was an underlying principle. I wasn't there yet. I didn't understand the intrinsic value factor, regardless of how that child was conceived. And I found a book, can't recall the name of it, but it was about women who'd been raped and then conceived. Well, the first question they asked these ladies was that if you conceive because of your rape experience, your assault, will you want to have an abortion? The majority said yes, absolutely. Now they didn't know they were pregnant. This was a matter of if you conceived, you know. The majority said yes. Well, it's really fascinating, because the women who did conceive, the majority of them kept their babies. In fact, a vast majority of them did. 32 or 36% of the women who kept their babies adopted them out, because they were afraid that the anger they had towards their the rapist, they would put out on the child. And again, I applaud them for that. But and I love the honesty with these women, because these women were doing it because they did not want to abort a baby. They thought it was wrong. But that doesn't mean they didn't pray that they would miscarry. I mean, they would jump up and down and just, you know, they were hoping to miscarry. The turning point, one woman put it, I was talking about this, the turning point for her was when she felt her baby move. And then all of a sudden, it was her baby. You think about all the women who have children and they have abusive husbands, but that doesn't mean they don't love and protect their children. It's kind of like that twist where this was my baby. My baby's father is a criminal and a bad man, but I'm not going to treat my baby like that. I'm going to protect my baby for that. So anyway, I thought that was really interesting. Of all the ladies that did not choose abortion, who kept their babies, not a one of them regretted that they made that decision. None of them regretted. They all felt like they had done the right thing, even though it was hard. We've got to throw this in. Church support, family support. A lot of family members with just as honest and caring, they'll encourage their loved one to have an abortion because they're also traumatized and they think that abortion will help this trauma. In fact, it's putting trauma on top of trauma. But their intentions are pure. They're not evil people. They're afraid and they want to help this loved one who's just been through this, horrendous experience. Out of the girls who did choose, and I wish, again, it was the majority of the girls who did choose abortion who regretted it. One in particular said it was harder to get over the fact that she had had an abortion than it was to get over the rape experience, because the abortion was something she chose to do, whereas the rape she was a victim to. And so that really helped me get a bigger understanding. But then, as I got to know Antionette and understood our intrinsic value, I thought, I don't need the statistics. I don't need these studies, because the principle is what's right and protecting that woman's dignity. Protecting the woman's God-given dignity. And no, it's not the answer. And it's so funny. I don't know if y'all remember, but in the stuff I said, remember when the advocates of abortion were saying if a woman is unstable after the abortion, it's because she was unstable prior. If she was psychologically fragile, that's why she had If you're going to use that argument, why would you ever want a woman who had just been through the trauma of a rape go through an experience like an abortion? Here she is fragile, fragile. Somebody has tried to take her dignity away from her, and you're going to subject this woman to something else? Why wouldn't she be more, I hate the word damaged, but affected, and crippled from her experience?
I would say a couple things. One of the organizations I mentioned earlier today is called Justice for All, and they are some of the best, I think, in the United States when it comes to dialoguing on these issues. And what I've heard listening to conversations, I've worked with them some and volunteered with them some, and listening to conversations, particularly on this issue, is if we think about what has happened in a rape situation, you have someone who's committed an absolute wrong against a woman. It's absolutely wrong. There's no excuse for it. There's no justification. There's no way to make it right. It's not even as though he stole money and he can pay the money back. There's no way that he's going to make this right. It's absolutely wrong. And it's something that's going to be woven in to her story. She may or may not find healing at the cross, but now it's going to be part of her story for the rest of her existence. It's absolutely wrong. It's an injustice, like highest, in the highest definition, completely unjust. So that's the framework that we're operating out of. And if we think about it in those terms, you have something that's completely unjust. It never should have happened. You do have questions about prenatal care. Who's going to pay for prenatal care? Who's going to actually believe her that she was raped? Does she have a boyfriend? Is she married? Does she have to tell her parents? Is she in school? What about the social stigma of the fact that she's now pregnant? We see burden on burden on burden on burden that have been piled on top of this woman. She's practically buried underneath them. This is what the rapist has done. He's not only raped her, he's not only truly violated her, but now he's heaped burden on burden on burden on top of this woman. if we look at it through this frame, who has done these things to this woman? The rapist has done these things to this woman. So again, we're going to go back to being intellectually honest. We're going to go back to the standard. Should the child be made to pay for the sins of his or her father? Do circumstances surrounding conception determine who is valuable? Do they? Or do they not? We have to be honest with ourselves. We have to be honest before the Lord. This is not an easy, rape and incest is easily the most difficult thing to talk about when you talk about the abortion issue. But we must be willing to be honest with ourselves and honest with other people. The rape victim, she's human. She's human. We don't leave her humanity at the door because she's now pregnant. We care about her. We love her. And we want to love her unborn child equally. We want to walk alongside her as we would walk along anyone else in a crisis pregnancy. But in order to really have this conversation, we must be honest about what we're actually talking about. The second thing I would say, just to give you a slightly different perspective. Let's say there are two women. One is 6 months pregnant, okay? 6 months pregnant. The second has a 6-month-old newborn. So do we understand? One is pregnant, 6 months. One has a newborn that is 6 months old. Both the unborn in utero and the newborn are products of rape. Do we understand the scenario? Should both mothers be allowed to take the lives of their children? If your answer is no, but you would say the pregnant woman should be allowed to take the life of her child, you must answer the question, why? What has changed for you? What is now different that you believe the one in utero, the one in the womb, has no value, product of rape, but somehow the one out here in the world has value, still a product of rape? The reason for ending the life of this one in the womb is the same as the reason for ending the life of the one outside of the womb. If we're going to be intellectually honest, if we're going to be consistent, both mothers should be allowed to end the lives of their children, because the whole reason we're allowing that is because of rape. I cannot make the choice for you. I know what I believe. You must make the choice for you. This is much bigger than just an issue. The Lord is saying, who do you worship as your creator? Do you worship me as your creator? Or do you worship other things? You're the one who has to make that decision.
And I want to finish up with your question, because you started by saying if someone were talking to you who had been raped, who had chosen an abortion, had already gone through an abortion. Oh, okay, thinking about it. Well, again, don't ever hesitate to say, I don't have the answers. Will you pray with me? You know, don't ever be afraid to do that. And pray for the Lord to give you wisdom, give us wisdom. And also don't be afraid to say, I don't believe that's the right answer. You know, we're like the woman who, when I finally trusted someone and told her I'd had the abortion, she could have soft-pedaled it and understood why I did it, you know, and just kind of let it be. The reason I call her my advocate is because she was not afraid to call sin a sin. And in doing that, she wasn't condemning me. It wasn't like the lady on the phone who said, well, you know abortion is murder now, don't you? She came alongside of me. I felt cared for by her. And she saw that I was still carrying this burden. And she wasn't afraid to identify it as a sin. And you need to take care of that sin, Dianne. She really was my advocate. And I appreciate, to this day, I appreciate that woman not being afraid to be honest with me and help me. She gave me courage. Whereas if she had just sympathized and understood and, well, you know, we do what we think is best at the time, you know, and all that, I would have left there feeling empty. I wouldn't have been fed spiritually. So we have not, but we just got to always pray for wisdom, because we cannot just run our mouths and think we can make a difference in a person's life. You know what I mean? Yes.
I'd like to ask Carolyn Christie, any thoughts, comments about this question?
So I do think that if the standard is that we are made in God's image, then it really doesn't matter our location or how it started. If it's wrong to kill an innocent human being, whether they're 6 months out of the womb, then it is also wrong, even if they are a product of rape. I will also say that you mentioned like abuse in foster care and adoption. I'm not aware of it as much in adoptions through agencies as other places, foster care maybe, but I do know that those people who have come through, who were a product of rape, and other people who've come through foster care are horribly offended at the idea that you would think that their life was so bad it should have been ended in the womb. They are real thriving people who maybe came through some hardships, overcame, and they're very active and happy in life. So I think we should keep that in mind. And then the final thing is we've had trainings with adoption places, and nowadays adoption is a different thing. You can go through a book of potential parents. You can find the ones you connect with. You can go out to coffee with them, and you can, you know, if they have kids, you can see how they treat kids. So I do think that adoption is, while very challenging to do that, instead of giving your baby away, you're picking parents to raise your child. So those were just the extra thoughts I had on that. Did you have anything?
I wanted to follow up on your second question, because it really, I think, becomes more a quality of life argument that we're making. This person is not going to have a good quality of life as I determine it, and so their life is not worth living. And I think that's very dangerous. It's a bit arrogant, egotistical, right, for me to tell another person, I don't think your quality of life is going to be good in the future. This has happened, guys. I mean, you know, we talked about if you don't value life at the beginning, you're not going to value life in the middle or at the end. In certain countries right now, I think the Netherlands is one, you can go and they can euthanize you. Euthanization takes your life with or without your consent. That's part of euthanasia. So if the hospital determines your life is not worth living, they can end it. That's significant, and it started somewhere. It didn't just come about overnight. It started with a worldview, with a life ethic, and it's borne itself out, no pun intended, now taking the lives of people, whether they consent or not, because they're wards of the hospital. So I think we need to be really careful when we're talking about, I'm going to project on this person, they are going to have a bad life. I know if my mom had gone to different people, they would have said, you're in a very abusive marriage. She ended up staying in that marriage. So life didn't become roses and cupcakes. Life continued to be difficult. And there are people who would have told her, you need to abort. But thank the Lord, someone else intervened. It could have been a very different outcome and a very different conversation if she had spoken to someone else who was making a quality of life argument. Part two of that would be, I could leave right now and have a terrible life. I could get hit by a Mack truck. I could have a disease. Horrible things could happen in my family. Lord knows I'm not asking for any of those things, but many different things could happen to me in the future. That doesn't mean that someone should be allowed to say, I'm going to end your life now based on what might happen to you in the future. We don't even, for instance, round up the homeless and eliminate them. I think majority of people could say, well, they don't really have a good quality of life right now, but we don't round them up and exterminate them. I think we need to be really honest, really, when we're talking about abortion, because abortion, as Dianne was talking about earlier, it eliminates in our mind a problem. The unborn is a problem. They're in the way of my future. They're in the way of my fear. I'm afraid. They're in the way of my convenience. I wanted to do other things. I wasn't ready to be a mom. I wasn't ready to be a dad. I can't afford it. I have stuff I want to do. Like, there's so, or I have real scary things that are happening right now. My husband's in jail, or he's abusive, or I don't know how I'm going to feed all my other kids. Like, every concern is not just a flippant, frivolous one, right? There's some very weighty, very meaty concerns. But if we boil it down to its basis level, the unborn is in the way. It's in the way, and it needs to be eliminated. And our response as believers, as the church, should be to point them to life, to wholeness, to resources, to help, but not simply to say, end the life of another human being.
I'd like you to answer this question and then talk about the scriptures that you said were the ones that people usually go to try to affirm abortion from the Bible. Okay? Over here first.
So my other question is what is the view then, I'm just continuing on this theme, of like Plan B? Is that a bad thing if you're just flushing your system after a rape just because? Because there's nothing definite yet. So is it really bad to flush your system? Would you tell that person, like, I don't even think anybody, especially if you did it in the first 24 hours, that you would actually know if you had anything in there or not, or if there really would be this guilt that people talk about that comes with abortion, like how you were talking about the integrity of an individual and how you feel. And so if you didn't know that either way, and you're just like, hey, I'm just doing this to just flush my system just in case, and then it takes it to the next level, are you saying then that I don't know, because I feel like there's this, like, then you're not allowed to use birth control because technically, like, you're intervening in God, and, like, where's condoms go into that? You know what I mean? Like, it can get a little, personally, what I think is a little extreme. But that's where I'm at, So I'm just curious. I guess there's, like, multiple layers there. But starting at Plan B, you guys can hit on the condoms and birth control if you want. But it's really Plan B is what I was curious.
Well, condoms and that, you don't have a conception. You're keeping things separate. So, and that's if you want to keep from getting pregnant. Now, and I'll be curious if you've heard different numbers. There's a 5% chance of getting pregnant after, and that's why that's using the Plan B. There is still a chance that you could be pregnant. So, what are you going to do with that? Now, initially, the girl or whoever's counseling her or whoever's with her, they may just be so anxious to get rid of any risk of being pregnant that we do this. But you also run the risk of thinking about it later, Now, at that time in that young lady's life, she may not have an understanding of our value. And later in her life, if she ever comes to know the Lord on that level and she realizes the value of our lives, it could come back to her about the value of that unborn child, that there was a 5% chance. 5% doesn't seem like that much, but there's an underlying principle there. As a Christian, am I going to trust God with that 5%? Am I going to encourage her, to trust God? Do I trust God enough to tell her to trust God? But
Okay,
so
clarify. When you say trust God with that 5%,
in other words, instead of taking that plan B, wait it out and see if you got pregnant.
okay, wait it out.
Now,
I
Carol,
see
do
what
you
you're
have
saying.
some
Okay.
thinking about that?
I'll go Mike's on that topic.
Pardon me?
I do have some thoughts, if I can share
Yeah,
them.
yeah, I'd be interested in what you had to say about that.
So I think sometimes there's, you know, conception used to be at fertilization, that was where the magic happens, that, you know, we become humans. They sort of have redefined it to implantation.
I can tell you the story.
Pro-abortion advocates, I believe, because if you believe that people become a person at fertilization, you can't take Plan B because you've already had intercourse. Fertilization could have already occurred before you take it. If you change it to implantation, then I think by that time Plan B might be too late.
Yeah.
So, so that would be where I would, for a life perspective, discourage Plan B. I would discourage it from a health perspective. We used to see quite a few young high school girls come in that had taken Plan B, and they had all these medical symptoms. I mean, really, it messes with your hormones. It's really unfortunate. They would feel pregnant even if they weren't. It was just the side effects from the Plan B. And we've certainly had women come in that took Plan B and are afraid they're still pregnant, and actually one of them in recent history was still pregnant, and then she wanted an abortion, and I kind of believe that maybe the ultrasound changed her mind. And we have a program where we help women that had financial issues, and she did. And so her life is just totally different now. She has a little baby.
Wow.
And she's just really grateful for all the support, and is in a much different place in her life right now.
I love that. I want to add to that because just the pill, the birth control pill, people have asked me about that, and I will share what I've learned, and then of course everyone comes up with their own conclusion. But it's really interesting what you said, because back in the 60s, when the pill first came out, it was very crude and very dangerous. But there was the question, is this terminating a pregnancy? Well, that's when the ACOG, the College of Obstetrics and Gynecology, the American College, it's ACOG. Anyway, they actually, in their literature, changed the time a pregnancy began from fertilization to implantation, solely because of that concern, taking the pill. And women were saying they didn't want to take it if there was a risk of interrupting a pregnancy.
Explain how that would happen. How would the pregnancy be interrupted?
So the question was, how can the
The
pregnancy
pill.
be interrupted?
Okay,
Explain how the pregnancy would be interrupted with the pill.
okay, it's again the hormones. I know how the two abortifacients work. How does okay, I know now. It's coming to me. You help me. It's killing the sperm, making the motility of the sperm is affected, the lubrication, so the way the sperm can travel to get to an egg, and then it kills the egg. 3 things. Is there another one?
Well, no. So that was the issue is with birth control, was that fertilization can still occur.
Yeah.
But it will cause, if it's implanted, I think it causes the uterine lining to slough off too. So even, I think
That's
that was,
it. An environment. It makes a bad environment. Sorry, guys, but anyway, that's right. But it doesn't. If that egg is still viable and the sperm get to that egg and there's fertilization, then even though the pill is supposed to create this bad environment, there's a chance for it. So,
just to be clear, like they're saying birth control could possibly harden the wall of the uterus, right? So the zygote cannot attach to the
embryo.
uterus. That means the zygote, which is a unique, genetically distinct human organism, is going to get flushed out of the uterus. That's ending its life. Or, what was the other thing? It keeps it from attaching.
Mm-hmm.
Is that the primary function? It keeps it from attaching.
The bad
So it's going to
environment.
flush it out. So if we're going back to value beginning from your beginning, then you have a new, unique, genetically distinct human organism that's being intentionally flushed out of the body. And that's the effect of the birth control. Now, I don't know that all birth controls act in the same way, but I think some of them do. And so that's definitely something to think
Yeah.
about and consider.
That's the primary. The thing about this, when ACOG came up with this new standard of when the pregnancy began, the embryologist went nuts. They could not believe they were saying that it began at implantation, because embryology, that's all they study, you know, as far as when that egg is fertilized. So I've tried, there's a group, and it's, they're OBGYNs, and they're pro-life, and I've been able to find a lot of really good resources through them, you know, as far as history and stuff like that, and they're the ones that gave a little insight into that. And now it's very hard to find where ACOG made that statement. They've, you know, gotten very quiet about that.
Any other questions before we go to questions related to the Bibles? So, yes, we do.
I was thinking, like, for example, Christian girls, should they, like, consider a sin to use the morning after pill? Like the morning after pill? Consider everything we talked.
Maybe. Yeah,
Right,
that's,
right, but like in general, they shouldn't at all. They should, like,
Well, you see, I hate to get up here and say they should not without being able to explain why I feel the way I do, because I think a lot of people march around with pro-life posters, but they're clueless. Their intentions might be right, but they're clueless as far as the actual trauma and panic that these girls are going through for them to even, you know, go to a clinic. So that's what we were just talking about. If you think that you could interrupt a pregnancy by taking this, and if life and value, our value, like Antionette keeps saying, it's what do you say, intellectually honest. You know, that if there is a chance a life has already begun, then you wouldn't want to take something that could end that if you are convicted about that. That's why I would personally discourage someone from doing that. But am I going to turn my back on somebody? We had a young woman who contacted us. She was pregnant. She was going to go through an abortion. And we both counseled her, and she went through it anyway. But I was so blessed because she was very traumatized. She told us the nitty-gritty about it, and she regretted it, but she still reached out to us afterwards. And I was really blessed by that, because if we had alienated her, she would have never come back. You know, she would never come back to talk to us. So I just thought, that's, you know, we haven't severed the communication.
Okay.
Yeah, and I mean, just so we're clear, we believe human life begins at conception. We believe abortion ends the life of an innocent human being. We believe that unequivocally, without question. And so what we're talking about here, I understand that lots of people have sex. They shouldn't be having it. You know what I mean? Shouldn't be happening. And I've spoken on a college campus in the spring, and one of the women, young women, college student, she said, you know, can't we just, we do need more resources, we need more this, we have problems, and I agree, we do need people to walk along, we do need to walk alongside each other in crisis. We could overnight solve the problem if people stop having sex with people they weren't married to. I mean, that's where the majority of abortions are happening. And so we can say all of these other things, but are we actually willing to say this is the reason it's happening? We have all of these other solutions, but guys, stop having sex with people you're not supposed to be having sex with. I know that sounds archaic, but abortion is one of the many, many, many ramifications of sleeping around. We're talking all of the emotional, all of the physical, your AIDS, your plethora of STDs, the way it affects you mentally and emotionally, to give of yourself and for it to end. I mean, you have major ramifications that are affecting people here and now, and you give and give and give of yourself, and you know, you're not cared for, you're not cherished, you're not loved. Like, it's really affecting people, but nobody necessarily wants to go there. They want to talk about all of this. And so, again, are we willing to be intellectually honest? Are we willing to be consistent? Let's just be real about the conversation.
I'd like to ask Carol. Okay, you had mentioned yesterday, so we had a little conversation with Carol. Carol mentioned that the majority of abortions today are in what age group?
Like the 24 to 35 age, maybe down to 22, but it's not high schoolers, it's college, and it is mostly women who already have children, and the ones we see, they often have a child under the age of 1, and they don't think they can handle another one.
You mean at your clinic?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Because in our experience, it's been 18 to 24 years old, that college age demographic, but what she's experiencing in her clinic is slightly older.
Actually, in Washington State, it's not the 18 to 22-year-olds. I think the 20... I hate to even quote it, but it was not 18-year-olds. It was in the 20s. And they was like the top 2 were not teenagers. The top 2 age groups were not teenagers. They were in their 20s up to the early 30s.
That was surprising to me. But the other question I wanted to just, before you go to the other, how many of them are married, and how many of them, what's the percentage of those in that category of the 24 to 35?
I don't know if I have numbers on the marriage.
Okay.
On how
I
many
was just
married.
curious about that. Okay, go ahead and share.
Okay. It's 000 Moses Lake. And we start the next one around 4:30, right? So I'll just move pretty quickly. Oh, 3:30. Oh, okay, I see it. I just misread the clock. Okay. Perfect. Thank you. Thank you. Okay, so we're going to run through difficult passages really quickly, okay? Genesis 2:7. Now, these are typically passages that are used to defend abortion. Generally 3 problematic, difficult passages, so just going to talk through them here. Genesis 2:7, and the Lord God formed man of the dust of the ground and breathed life into his nostrils, the breath of life, and man became a living being. Okay, the argument here is that we see he's talking about Adam. This verse is talking about Adam. It's talking about the creation of Adam. And the Lord formed man of the dust of the ground. That's what we know. He formed him in the dirt. And he breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, and man became a living being. So the argument is the Lord had to breathe into Adam in order for him to become a living being. The Lord had to breathe into Adam in order for him to become valuable, like considered a human being. Okay? So the argument is nowadays with the unborn, they have to take their first breath in order to become a valuable human being. That's the argument that's made in conjunction with this scripture. Well, maybe I'm off again. 1 sec. Yeah. Okay. What would we say to that? The Lord had to breathe the breath of life into Adam. Why? Because Adam was basically like this lounge chair. Looks very comfortable, but that's basically what Adam was like. He was an inanimate object. He was like a statue. He was a man of dust, and he was laying on the ground. He had never been alive, ever. The Lord formed him, kind of like you would form a clay pot. He had to breathe the breath of life into him so that he could come to life. Okay? The unborn is breathing in the womb. It's breathing through the umbilical cord. Now, it's true that those capabilities have to develop for the unborn. It's not automatically breathing when it's 2 cells in the sense that we would think of breathing. However, the unborn's living, moving, growing. It's reacting to stimuli. It's experiencing cellular reproduction. And so the mode of breathing changes, okay? The mode of breathing changes as the unborn develops. The mode of breathing changes from the umbilical cord to breathing through the nose and mouth once they are outside of the mother. However, the Lord doesn't breathe life into the unborn when it's born. It's already alive. It's already moving, growing, developing. I mean, consider children that are born prematurely, right? They're not born at 9 months, they're born at 7. Well, they're less developed, but they're already growing, they're already breathing. Consider the example that some newborns do not immediately breathe through their nostrils when they're born. They don't. They're still in the amniotic sac. Well, I don't think any of us would say we should be allowed to end that newborn's life simply because it's not breathing through its nostrils. As people are making this argument, the Lord had to breathe into Adam and he became a valuable human being. We can't end the life of the child who's born in the amniotic sac simply because it's not breathing through its nostrils. It's not the breath, it's not the mode of breathing that makes you a valuable human being. It's the Lord, because you're made in his image. Again, as he said in Genesis 9:6, whoever sheds man's blood, by man his blood will be shed. For in the image of God he made man. He established the standard. It's not our standard. We're just the messenger for the standard. So that is how we would answer this particular scripture. And again, not necessarily our original thoughts. We pulled a lot from people who are far wiser than we are. Okay, Exodus 21, 22 through 25. If men fight and hurt a woman with child so that she gives birth prematurely, yet no harm follows, he shall surely be punished accordingly as the woman's husband imposes on him, and he shall pay as the judge determines. But if any harm follows, then you shall give life for life, eye for eye, tooth for tooth, hand for hand, foot for foot, burn for burn, wound for wound, stripe for stripe. So, do we understand this scenario? We have 2 men. They are fighting, okay? One of them hits a woman who is pregnant. She gives birth prematurely, okay? So she gives birth before it's time for her to give birth because these 2 men are fighting and one of them hit her. In the first scenario, no harm follows. So what happens? Since no harm follows, that's what we're reading in the text, no harm follows. The guy who hits the woman, he's going to be punished as the woman's husband imposes, okay? Whatever the woman's husband is saying here, that's what he's going to have to do, and he pays as the judge determines. Does that make sense? Okay? What happens in the second scenario? 2 men fighting. One of them hit the pregnant lady. She gives birth prematurely. If any harm follows, then it is life for life, tooth for tooth, eye for eye, burn for burn. Okay? So the difference here is, first scenario, no harm follows. Second scenario, if any harm follows, then basically whatever harm took place, it's equal. Tooth for tooth. You made them lose a tooth, you lose a tooth. You made them lose an eye, you lose an eye. Okay? Do we understand the scenario here? Okay. The argument that people make is that the harm that's being talked about here only applies to the woman. Okay? That's the argument that's made with this passage of scripture. So people will say, no, the harm that's talked about is just in relation to the woman. No one was talking about the unborn. Okay? That's what, so do you see how that would change things? If we're only talking about the woman, then in this first scenario, it's like, well, nothing happened to the woman, so you just get a fine. Basically, people are implying the unborn could have been killed could have been completely lost when the guy hit the pregnant lady. The unborn could have been completely annihilated, but nothing happened to the woman, so no big deal. You just pay a fine and you do whatever her husband wanted you to do. 1 second, 1 second. The second scenario, where they say if any harm follows, the argument is, again, well, that only applies to the woman. Anything could have happened to the unborn, but if anything happens to the woman, then it's life for life, tooth for tooth, foot for foot. Go ahead.
If it didn't apply to the unborn child, why mention that she's pregnant? Why not just say, hit a woman?
Amen, sister. Amen. Amen. So, here's what we see. I keep putting it at the wrong thing. Oh, it was just a minute ago. Huh? Oh, it just lit up blue. And where am I? Oh, perfect. Okay. So, in the Hebrew, okay, the words that are used are yeled and yasa. Child, come forth. When we're saying, hits a pregnant lady and the child comes forth. In the Hebrew, this is what's happening. Child, come forth. When we go back, okay, and we read in the proper context, we see that yasa, it's used in the context of emergence of living things, okay? Living. So basically, she's delivering a live child, not a dead baby. Ancient Hebrew, they had words for abortion and miscarriage, but Moses doesn't use those words. He uses child come forth like a living child comes forth, okay? There's no reason to presume that the child is dead. There's no reason to project that the child is dead here. The passage could draw this distinction. The passage could make a distinction in value, saying, just as you said, why are we talking about a pregnant lady anyway in this particular scenario? It doesn't even matter if the baby doesn't matter. Excellent point. And the passage doesn't draw a distinction saying, for instance, if any harm happens to the woman but nothing to the baby, we don't care. It could have done that, and it doesn't do that. There's no reason to imply or read in the implication that the child died. There's no reason to do that here. Does that make sense? Okay, so, and something just to mention, when you're having a conversation, because again, the point isn't to argue, and the point isn't to win. The point is to reconcile people back to what is true. Because all of us, if we don't now, then we did it sometime in the past, all of us believe things that were wrong. All of us. And so when we're having this conversation, it's not to one-up somebody, it's not to say, I gotcha, it's to reconcile people back to what is true, because the Lord is trying to set people free, not just from a past abortion experience. He's trying to set people free in terms of what they believe about their value. He's trying to set them free in terms of what they believe about Him. And so all of this is to provide color to the greater conversation. The Lord is consistent. He doesn't just arbitrarily throw things around. He doesn't arbitrarily handle life. He's the author of life. He's the only author of life. No one else makes life, just the Lord. And so He's consistent in His ethic. He's consistent in His principles. He builds on top of Himself. Do we understand this? Got a good idea of what's going on here? Okay. Excellent. You guys are so smart. Okay. Numbers 5:11 through 28. I am going to read what is more relevant here. 19 through 21 and 27 through 28. Excuse me. Okay, general scenario though. There's a man, he thinks his wife has been unfaithful, okay? And this was for the Hebrews, this was in Israel. There was a certain process that if a man believed his wife had been unfaithful, there was a certain process that they would follow. And she would be given a certain bitter water that the priest would have her drink, and depending on how it affected her, it would help to determine whether or not she had been unfaithful to her husband. Okay? Does that make sense? So there was a bitter drink, her husband thinks she's been unfaithful, and they're going to go through this process to determine whether or not she has. Okay? 19 through 21. The priest shall put her under oath and say to the woman, if no man has lain with you, and if you have not gone astray to uncleanness while under your husband's authority, be free from this bitter water that brings a curse. But if you have gone astray while under your husband's authority, and if you defiled yourself and some man other than your husband has lain with you, then the priest shall put the woman under the oath of the curse, and he shall say to the woman, the Lord make you a curse and an oath among your people, when the Lord makes your thigh rot and your belly swell. Okay? So, she drinks the bitter drink. If she's been unfaithful, the result was, the Lord make you a curse and an oath, your thigh is going to rot, your belly is going to swell. Okay? That's what happens as a result. Does that make sense? Okay? Okay. 27 and 28. When he has made her drink the water, then it shall be, if she has defiled herself and behaved unfaithfully toward her husband, the water that brings a curse will enter her, it will become bitter, her belly will swell, her thigh will rot, and the woman will become a curse among her people. Okay? But if the woman has not defiled herself and is clean, then she shall be free and may conceive children. Okay? So do we see this scenario? She's going to drink the bitter water. If she's been unfaithful, the thigh's going to rot, the belly's going to swell. If she has not been unfaithful, okay, then she's clean and she's free and may conceive children. Do we understand the two scenarios? Okay? So, people have said, oops, wrong way. We were already there. Okay, that this thigh rotting and belly swelling was a euphemism for getting rid of, it had to do with the reproductive system. When they talk about the thigh rotting and the belly swelling, they're talking about the woman's reproductive system. And people have read into this passage that she is pregnant and the Lord is getting rid of that pregnancy because the thighs rotting, the belly swelling, he's making her barren, basically. Okay? That's what people have read into the passage. Okay, what's the problem? The problem with saying that she was pregnant. There's nothing in the verse to imply that this woman is pregnant. What happens in verse 28? It says, if the woman has not defiled herself and is clean, she can be free and she can conceive. Okay? So there's nothing in this passage, and it's a long one, you can see it, to imply that the woman is pregnant. What we are talking about is unfaithfulness. And if you're found to be unfaithful, the Lord can cause you to lose your ability to conceive. He can make you barren. But there's nothing in the passage that indicates you're pregnant and the Lord is killing that child as a punishment to your unfaithfulness. Okay? But that's an argument that's made with this passage. So we see, if the opposite is that she's clean and she can continue to bear children, the opposite of that is that you can't have kids. There's nothing in here to say you had a kid and the Lord took it. All right? That was my point, and I didn't make it before. When someone says something to you, when they make whatever kind of claim it might be, and again, our desire is reconciliation to the truth, and the Lord, that He loves everybody. Don't just accept what people say. It's totally okay to say, I don't know, or let me think about it. But make other people prove what they're saying. People don't just get to hold up this passage and say, well, clearly, this is what it means. Okay, brother, let's sit down and really find out what it means. Okay, sister, let's have this conversation. Don't just accept something because it's hard or it's hostile or angry or hurting even. Someone could be speaking from a place of deep pain, but we don't just accept on face value what's being said. Let's truly come and reason together and find out what is true. Because again, something is alive. Something will no longer be living. That is an undeniable fact. And it's very important what it is that's no longer going to be living. It's also very important how it's going to affect the people involved in that scenario. Abortion is not a neutral act. I know that we told you earlier, 1 in 4 women will have had an abortion by the time she reaches age 45. Also affects the men. That's a lot of people. Let's say that half of them said, abortion's the greatest thing. I was so happy I did it. And let's say the other half said, abortion's not the greatest thing and I deeply regret it. Okay? There's a lot of ministry to happen with this half that says, I deeply regret it. But here's the other thing. We're operating under a standard that is absolute. The Lord is either creator, and that means something. He either made you in his image, and that means something, or he's not actually creator, and he didn't actually make you. So he's a liar. But he can't be both, and he can't be one only sometimes. He's got to be this thing all the time, or he's not really who he claims to be. Abortion is not a neutral act. It doesn't become a neutral act just because someone says, I wasn't affected by abortion. Now, if I was to speak to a woman or man and they said, you know what, my abortion has no effect on me, I'm not going to tell them, well, you're a big liar. They're sharing what their experience is at that moment, right? Or what they believe their experience is. But I'll tell you about, there are certain people, they have this medical condition where they cannot feel pain. Anyone know what that's called? It's escaping me, but they cannot feel pain, okay? So they can put their hand on the stove, their hand can be burning, they can't feel the pain, okay? So let's say that this kind of person walks through a burning building, okay? They walk through a room and it's on fire, and they come out the other side of the room. Have they been affected by the fire? They have been affected by the fire. Would they tell you, I'm fine, I haven't been affected? Exactly, they would. They would say, I'm fine, I haven't felt anything, I haven't been affected by this, but you better believe they've been affected by that fire. Abortion is the same way. We're not neutral actors on neutral ground. There's a standard, and everything is happening underneath that standard of value. There's no way you're going to take the life of another and not be impacted by it. There's no way. So, even if, now, caveat, even if the woman in this passage had lost the child, even if the Lord in his sovereign wisdom had said, I'm taking the child from you, that is the Lord as a single actor in his sovereign wisdom. Just like David and Bathsheba, right? The child was not allowed to grow up and continue on in the world, right? So, it's one thing for the Lord to make a choice in his sovereignty that this life is going to end. It's quite another for human beings to say the Lord did this thing in a solitary moment, therefore we get carte blanche license for abortion. Very different. Does that make sense? So, that's how I would sum that up. Okay?
Thank you. Okay, let's take a 5-minute stand-up break if